But the things that some of these sectarians are arguing about, like when they're getting in endless debates on aqida, Ash'ari, Salafi, Maturidi, Athari, whatever, when they're arguing on those things, those are not, I'm not saying that they're not important to be discussed, but they're creating a war on those issues, and they're creating animosity and division amongst Muslims on the basis of these things, which, by the way, have been debated for 1,000 years. They have been debated and argued for 1,000 years. If Ash'ariism and the Ash'ari aqida was going to destroy the ummah and lead the entire ummah astray, it has had over 1,000 years to do so. It has had over 1,000 years to do so. So you debating it now is not more urgent than it was 100 years ago, 200 years ago, 300 years ago, 1,000 years ago. If Salafism, in the same in the sense of the Athari Aqidah, whether you want to say that's the Aqidah of Ibn Taymiyyah or the Aqidah of Imam Ahmed or combination thereof, even though there are significant differences, whatever. If following that Aqidah was going to lead the Ummah astray, it would have done that 800 years ago or 500 years ago or 300 years ago. So it's not urgent. Why is it not urgent? Because the majority of the Ummah, the majority of Muslims have no clue like what these debates are about. Like they never come up. Like these kinds of debates on, well, what does this attribute of Allah, what does that really mean? And let's analyze that. The vast majority of Muslims, 99.99999% of the Ummah, the thought never even occurred to them. And if they even studied it, they have studied it in the sense that, okay, this is what we believe. Okay, I accept that, without working it out for themselves, without analyzing it for themselves. Me personally, for example, I had no idea about these debates or these discussions. I read the Quran, I read many hadith before I realized that, oh, this is something that there's a debate about. Then I went and studied. I went and studied for a long time. And I realized that, well, for me, this is very interesting, but it gets to, when you go to a certain depth, then I don't really see a benefit for me personally. And yeah, there's a certain position that I adopt and I find most compelling. But beyond that, it's just above my pay grade. And I don't see this as necessary for being a good Muslim. So that's me doing all this research. But for the vast majority of Muslims, you don't need to know exactly some of these details in order to be a Muslim, because the pillars of Iman are very clear what you need to believe in as a Muslim. The pillars of Iman, the 6 pillars of Iman that makes you a Muslim: believing in Allah, the angels, the books, the messengers, the qadr of Allah, and the last day. The last day. That's what you need to believe in. And the vast majority, they not only don't have the ability or the time, like they literally wouldn't be able to understand like some of these nuances or these distinctions. That's why you have like the Ash'ari position or you have the Athari position for 1,000 years. And look, we still have a ummah, we still had a khilafah, we had these major institutions, these madaris. We had this kind of economic dominance. We had military dominance. We had the golden ages of Islam, quote unquote golden ages, because obviously the golden age was the time of the Salaf. But we had, centuries of Islamic prosperity, Muslim prosperity, without having these questions resolved, without having these debates resolved. Isn't that interesting? But as soon as liberalism comes onto the scene, as soon as secularism comes onto the scene, then it's chaos. Then we have Muslims being genocided. We have Muslims being subjugated. We have Muslim lands being conquered and dominated. Suddenly we have many Muslims who are leaving Islam or who have become completely detached from practicing the Sharia, who no longer even believe in it, applying the Sharia, who no longer even believe in the concept of Islamic governance or a Khalifa, who believe in the provisions of Islamic law. Suddenly, we have this huge amount of deviance that's not affecting like 1 or 2 people. It's a cancer that's affecting countless Muslims, the vast majority of Muslims. Do you see the difference in scale? The difference in scale between, the challenge of liberalism, secularism, feminism, atheism versus some of these aqida debates. Again, aqida debates are great, just as long as they're not serving as a tool of sectarianism, a tool of divide and conquer, a tool of let's pit, let's fight against each other when our families are falling into kufr. And unfortunately, you have like a religious class that have been trained to just exacerbate sectarianism along these lines. And, I can't tell you the amount of times that, I go and meet with someone and they say, oh, Daniel, great job. You're doing great work. I like your debates, blah, blah, blah. But, you really need to study kalam. You really need to you need to study Shaykh al-Islam Ibn Taymiyyah, or you need to study, kalam, or both sides say this, right? Both sides say this. I say, oh, okay, why is that? First of all, in my head, I'm thinking, okay, you assume that I haven't studied this, so you're being condescending, but okay, I'll put that aside, that you're making such a statement. But okay, yeah, why? Why do I need to study these books from 500 years ago or these debates? Why are they so critical? They're like, well, these debates, this methodology, this is how you can address our situation today. I'm like, oh, really? And then I ask them for an example, and inevitably they can't give me an example about how these debates specifically within this tradition of aqida debate, how it's relevant to Zionism, how it's relevant to atheism, or not atheism, but like feminism or liberalism or secularization, or the question of like, you have people who are denying the Quran because they don't understand how Allah can give permission to the husband to physically discipline his wife. They can't understand that. They can't grasp that. And so they reject the Quran, or they reject hadith because there's a hadith about, the intelligence of men versus women. They can't understand. They reject the sunnah. So what specifically within these aqida debates addresses that? There's nothing. There's nothing. You can only make it very generic, like, well, this tradition gives you mantiq, like logical reasoning. That's how it's relevant. That's a stretch. That's just right. You can learn logic, and you can learn that without going into any of these books. They, in fact, teach them, and they teach logic in the university and logical analysis in the secular universities.